I'll get my glasses.
Yeah, I'm going to share the screen.
What's it called this evening? 7 or 8. I say no.
You could ask me to be a little earlier. Well, I mean,
And I hope you're all seeing.
I'll be eating between 7 and 8, right?
I want to say 9.
How are we doing? Are
Good
we,
time would be good for you,
8:30.
Peter.
Richard Reeves, The Shocking Story of the Japanese Internment.
okay, good. Now from our local audience, I've discovered I have to wait to the last minute to plug in. And so now I'm going to plug in and we'll see if my local audience sees the same screen. It'll be a miracle. It is a miracle. Okay, so for the local audience, I can.
Do we see Rudy?
I
don't see Rudy.
I'll turn this this way so you can see Rudy at a distance. How's that? Okay. Off we go. So you'll remember this is the book that we read about Senator Simpson in his friendship with Norm Mineta. And then thanks to Carol, we met Senator Simpson in 2017. She took us to a conference in Berkeley. And Aiko reconnected. Aiko, would you like to comment on this updated picture?
Well, he's still very funny, still very tall. And unfortunately, Norman Mineta has passed on. But he had an 80-year friendship with Norman Mineta because they got to know each other since they were 10 in the Boy Scouts. And he said that when he first, his mother and the scout troop said, "Oh, we're going to Heart Mountain to meet these Japanese boys." He said, "Why would I want to go to a concentration camp with barbed wire all around it?" But he did it. So he must have had very enlightened parents. And he met Norman and then they became friends. And they started this institute at Heart Mountain, and their goal was $8 million, and they've raised 7.98, I think. So they're almost there. It's opening next year, and it's to teach young would-be politicians about how to talk to each other and how to communicate without being the way they are today. So this is an enlightened Republican, and I wish we had more of them. He's a very nice man, and I was totally happy to see that he's still here. And he spent the whole day Saturday at the convention and then came for the dinner. So he's still very energetic, and we were really pleased to see him.
It was there.
That's it.
Okay, and then Aiko got his book, which is awesome, and he signed it. And Aiko had him sign it to me, and then he took credit for getting her here by telling her about the reunions in 2017. So very sweet moment.
And the thing is, the people that are involved in this is really the fourth generation. I'm the fourth generation that are really involved, and they really want to make sure that America benefits from this experience, and that other people do too, and that we can learn from it. And as I said to my family, our parents' generation never talked about it, but because they didn't talk about it, my sister and I never grew up with anger, feelings of inferiority, chip on the shoulder, nothing. And so we could grow up normal people. And that's a real gift to us for growing up and feeling normal about all of this, you know, even though it wasn't a great thing, but you know, we can learn from it. And I'm real pleased to say that the Minetta Simpson Institute will continue that work.
Where is it going to be?
Hard Mountain.
Yeah, Aiko, do you want to say anything about the institute, the Minetta Simpson Institute?
Well, it's going to be open next year, and they're almost at their goal. And so, you know, I think it's a great thing that such understanding and goal of people talking together and coming to understand each other, even though you have differences in opinion, is coming from two well-known people. I mean, they raise the money that they set out to do. It's their connections. And I think this will be something that's really a good thing to support.
One of the most shameful period.
Is that, Aiko, is that a picture down below of the dormitory?
Yeah, that's
the institute, isn't
and
it?
that's the institute, and they modeled it on what the barracks look like.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Is Aiko's last name?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh dear.
She's O2.
And the thing is,
That's
you
what
know,
this is.
my two
O-O-N.
uncles, they weren't protesters, but they went to the they didn't volunteer, they got drafted. And I said to my uncle, who's 97, why did you go? And he said, well, we would have gone to jail if we didn't, you know. And the JCL has made peace with the
In
protesters,
Wyoming.
because the thing is that the protesters and the people who were in the 442nd are two colors of the same bandwidth, because one protested for our civil rights and the other showed that we were loyal Americans. And so, you know, they should come together. There was a time when they weren't together, you know, because one group was different from the other, and they didn't support each other, but now they've come together.
Well, that's inspiring. Okay.
John, can I ask Aiko something?
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the Minetta Simpson Institute is on site
On site in Heart Mountain, Wyoming.
at Heart Mountain. Okay.
Mhm.
Right
And
out
if
in the
you-
middle of the desert.
If I were younger, I'd probably serve on their board, ask to serve on their board, because they're doing good work.
And so this is Simpson who got up on Saturday afternoon and gave a talk on his buddy Norm Minetta. It's sort of a eulogy after the fact. And Aiko, he was just as witty as ever.
Oh yeah, he was really pretty funny. They talked about their relationship, and I guess Norman Minetta had quite a laugh. And you know, they continued it, knew each other for a long, long time. It was a good thing.
Yeah, it's a really inspirational story. So for the last time, I'll thank Carol Moroda for making that connection.
Yeah, thank you, Carol.
You're so welcome. I'm sure he was thrilled to see you again.
Boy, he just gave me such a big hug and kiss. You know?
Hey,
I don't know. You got to watch out. They're kind of lucky.
Yeah.
and then there was a special ceremony for the people who turned up who had been born in the camps. And so Aiko and Shigeko were there for 2 years, and just enough time for both of them to be born in the camps. Were you the only siblings born in the camps there?
Well, yeah, they didn't say they were siblings, at least. But look at, you know, that lady in the plaid shirt, the black and white plaid shirt. Look at how young she looks. She was really attractive, and she looks so young.
Must have been a baby, huh?
Yeah,
Well, they
well,
were all
she's
babies.
my
They were
age.
born.
You're all, oh, I know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. A jarring transition. And this has to do with how the war ended. And it's also a bit of Bay Area history. So I'm throwing it in just for how much of this history of this story took place in Berkeley and Oakland. Just out a couple of weeks ago. It's based on the book, which I've read in the last 6 months. It's just a great book. And apparently the people who've seen it, it's spectacular. I think Michael Stein has seen it. What I'm looking forward to in particular is Matt Damon plays General Leslie Groves, and Emily Blunt plays Kitty. And she is a very interesting and complicated character. And we got an
Emily Blunt is
Irish
the
actor
wife
playing
of the actor who plays George
Oppenheimer.
Reacher. I mean, Jack Reacher.
Okay. So last time there was some speculation on China's farm policy. And I'd say it's fair to say there was an alarming article and we couldn't find any real-time confirmation. But I do have a bit more information I just want to run through because we kind of opened Pandora's box last week. It is true that central planning is back. Deng, his rural reforms said left it up to the market, left it up to the peasants to decide what they were going to grow. But that's not Xi Jinping's style. And last week we said this guy Luttwak said that Xi is going for self-sufficiency, and there's some truth in that. And that China really imports so much in the way of cereal to feed its as animal feed as much as anything, and most of it is supplied by the Western Hemisphere, and that wouldn't be open to him if there were a war. We know, though, that in addition to preparing for war, there's other reasons to change their grain policy production, and it's global warming. And we had seen 2 or 3 weeks ago these graphs from The Economist showing that grain production for wheat, rice, and corn is going to be going down with global warming. The claim by Luttwak was that there's a huge deforestation campaign going on. Now, it's somewhat true, but there was an article just this week in The Economist giving more details, saying that the explanation is more untidy and in some ways more benign. It is true, as Ludwig asserts, that in 2011, the priority was forestation. There was one example that The Economist gave where they planted mulberry trees and told the peasants they could get rich from the silk that was going to be produced. Well, that didn't turn out. So the peasants stopped tending to the mulberry trees. So there's other reasons that go in the wrong direction here. So there are other reasons, and it is true that there is a new rural initiative, and the food security has become a priority. And it is true that some ambitious village cadres have sent bulldozers up to tear out fruit trees. So that's true. And they've been criticized, though, as being more zealous than they should be, and for not using their common sense. And so people were asking, what about the soil erosion? And the point was made that a lot of the forestation was put on underused farmland, and didn't necessarily mean less grain. There have been some good ideas, which is to grow sunflowers in suburban parks and along highways. But some bad ideas, some green trails have been taken out. And although local officials deny it, some netizens report that has happened. And it is true that in Yunnan, rice fields were put into terraces that were unstable, and there has been erosion and landslides. So that is true, as Luttwak reported. So social media in China is kind of like our social media. There's extremes, and some radicals are claiming, hey, are we going back to the Mao area where a lot of bad decisions were made during the Cultural Revolution? And they're even get even more upset with the aquaculture that has been destroyed to drain land that have been used for fisheries for grain. That has happened. And so there was this big backlash, and the government is sensitive to what's going on their internet, believe it or not. And so in June, they came out with a directive banning local governments from putting crops on steep slopes because of the erosion and landslides. And a general order went out to protect farmers' interests at all times, very general. But just a couple of weeks ago, not quite a couple of weeks ago, the Central Commission met and reasserted, hey, you know, food security is a national priority. And they used a special word that's only rolled out for big deals. And it's that word, which I won't try to pronounce, but they played this card and emphasized we do need to grow grain, and we can't afford frivolities like fruit and flowers, frivolities. And they point out that China only has 9% of the world's arable land, and only 6% of its fresh water, which is sobering because they've got more like, I think, 20% of the population. And so she made this quote about the Chinese people holding their rice bowls firmly in their own hands. So, I mean, is China doing this to get ready to go to war, as Luttwak says, or it is in preparation for global warming? Well, we'll see. But local bosses are kind of going back and forth. And so now instead of coming up with a coherent single policy, they've been layering one policy on top of another. And you're kind of getting a hodgepodge. And this is one of the risks of central planning, as we know. Anyway, she visited, went on a tour of Chengdu, pointing out, hey, this is heaven's greenery. And now all of a sudden, there's all kinds of billboards going up, touting Xi's quote of being heaven's greenery. So is it an incompetence? Is it abuse of power? Is it indecisiveness? In any case, it's a cumulative tangled thicket, is one phrase was used. And these changeable policies, a lot of the peasants are kind of passively shrugging their shoulders and say, it's like the weather, it's a constant that has to be endured. So I'll take a pause there and see if there's any comments, and specifically, did I address the question at hand, Bob, to your satisfaction?
Sure. Yes, you did. I was just immediately so skeptical of that extreme, what I consider to be extreme claim of central government going in and tearing up forests they only just planted, and so you've assuaged me.
Okay. All right. I swear to God, we're gonna
Why
get
are they doing it? Are they not?
Santa
They could run that
Catalina.
through one that shut the river with the
Three
bridge.
quick headlines
I didn't
from
know they were tearing up
the
trees they just
Ukraine.
planted.
That was fish.
There's another bridge that you need to know about. It's the Kandahar road bridge, and that's different than the Kherson bridge that we've talked about before. It's been hit by Ukrainian drones once last month, and reportedly last weekend, as reported by tourists. The military bloggers, the Russian military bloggers, have been amazingly forthright in reporting all the negative things about the Russian army, but they never reported this, and it was a real break, and it's led to the theory that these so-called military bloggers, taking the Russian side but being critical of Russia, have been muzzled in the wake of the Prigozhin mutiny. So we'll be lacking that kind of refreshing source of what's really going on, it looks like. And so the drone attacks from Ukraine are reaching Russia, and particularly Moscow. And I like this statement from Zelensky. He said, war is returning to its source and to its symbolic centers and to its military bases. This is inevitable and natural and absolutely fair. And this is from somebody who's seeing public infrastructure for citizens bombed repeatedly. So they've, for him to bend over backwards to say that it's fair for them to retaliate, I thought was interesting, and he addressed it. I think it chose the right word. A hopeful sign, the Putin, there's an upcoming election, and he had been planning to run on how well the war in Ukraine was going. But after the mutiny and after sobering reports from the front, he's not going to do that. And propaganda brochures have been destroyed, and the support is plummeting. Now, this is according to Telegraph, and they're a little less measured than the Financial Times, I think it's fair to say, right, Bob? So in any case, it's a hopeful thing, and we'll see. And I'm waiting for our historian Snyder to weigh in. Let's see what he has to say. The final positive headline is Putin gave a Navy Day speech, and pardon the pun, it was watered down. Last year he had talked about duplicating Peter the Great's expansion, but a lot of their naval stuff was missing from the representation in the parade for the first time. And during the Navy Day, Ukraine hacked into Russian sailors' devices a video of the greatest victory, naval victory of the war so far, which was the sinking of the flagship Moscow cruiser last year. So they're up to the tricks. All right, so in the absence of any comments on Ukraine and Russia, we'll go to another ship at another time and another place. Any comments? I'll pause and on we go. So now we're back to 1542. This is San Salvador, the name of Cabrillo's ship, but he didn't follow the usual tradition, which is naming the place you discover after your ship. He was so unimpressed with San Diego, and its name will change a lot over the years. I won't go into that now. But a little over a week later, after leaving San Diego, he gets to Santa Catalina, which did impress him. And he originally named what we call Santa Catalina after his ship, San Salvador. Just a reflection of, at last, something made an impression on him. And so up he went from San Diego to Santa Catalina. And on the island, there were a lot of natives that came out of the bushes. They were very excited, dancing, inviting them to land. And what they're encountering now for the first time is the culture of the Channel Islands, which is Chumash. We've talked about it before. The modern name for it is Tungva. It's what the Chumash people call themselves now. And this is a map of all the Tungva villages. It's hard to read. I couldn't get a very good map, but here's a more updated map with, at least you can read some of the names, and you can see there were quite a few Chumash settlements, and they have familiar names. So this is all Chumash a language, all these names that we're used to. They've been there for at least 11,000 years. 11,000 for those of you that are just joining us. This is what we looked at when we were covering the human migration from Siberia. And you'll see that the Channel Islands make the map. If Jim Teisel were here, he'd point out that he's done digs in Paisley Caves, famous Paisley Caves, famous for finding the first samples of human poop. And Teisel's proud to say he's worked with the poop doctor of Paisley Cave. But the Channel Islands were heavily settled. This was a good place to stop. As they came south, and we can't think they first came south in boats that allowed them to get across earlier than if they had to walk across the land bridge. And following kelp forests all the way down. But the Channel Islands was one of the first places that they stopped and settled. And you remember the sea level was about 300 feet lower than it was now. So a lot of the archaeology ruins are under 300 feet of water. But there's enough information to help us understand. So on Santa Catalina Island, you remember Homer said, "Wait a minute, the mad Frenchman of Cherry Creek, he was an ancestor," and we went, "What?" So I Googled Santa Catalina Island, and guess what? There's a Boushey Canyon, and it's spelled the way Homer spells his name, and the way Jenny spells her name. And so this is also the Boushey Canyon Road. If you go there for a hike, I'll pause a second and wonder if Homer has any comments.
Oh, it's okay. Here you go.
Yeah, you wrote me. I'll highlight just a few of these, and I'll let you fill in on what I haven't highlighted. He mined silver. He wound up in Bakersfield, but you fill in the rest, Homer.
Well, that's pretty much it. He supposedly trained in engineering, i.e. surveying in Paris, and came back from Boucherville in Canada, went south to Louisville, and thank God turned right and came to California. So he was there when gold was discovered. And if you had the talent as a surveyor and engineer, you were in demand. So he stayed, and he did mine silver on Catalina Island. He changed his name on coming into America from Etienne Boushey to Stephen Boushey. And our daughter-in-law worked for the LA Times, so she went down to the tombs to look it up and found references to Boushey as the mad Frenchman of Cherry Creek. That was near where his mine presumably was. But another book I read on Catalina did allude to another Boushey who ran a saloon in Avalon, and it says some of the stories might be confused as to who was really the mad one. But looking at our family history, we might qualify. So he died in Bakersfield, and he is buried in that city's Union Cemetery. I sent you pictures of the tombstones for Etienne and his wife Zoe and their son Alexander. I always love it that their two boys were named Jules César. That's my great grandfather, and Alexander. That is a family with ambition. Julius Caesar and Alexander are the names you give your sons. Alexander was the sort of French mountain man. He died quite young of pneumonia, but Jules César ended up in San Francisco as a physician and actually practiced on Mission Street. So we're quite sure of this history back to Etienne. He also created the water system for Cerro Gordo, a town recently sold, in a ghost town that had been the site of silver mining. And the Chronicle ran a story on it because this town was for sale for like $1 million, the whole town, that Stephen Boushey had developed the water system for it, the aqueducts, which saved the silver mining because they needed water for that. So yeah, we have that. That's in my bucket list. Set foot on Boushey Canyon Road because I haven't done it.
It's supposed to be a hard trail.
A hard trail, hard to get to and hard to follow. It's steep, but so I don't want to walk the whole thing. But I just would like to put foot on it. Just I don't know, just to do it. That's the story.
Well, thank you for this connection to the past, Homer.
Well, thank you for bringing up Catalina, giving me this chance to speak about it.
Yeah, well, we got to thank Cabrillo in the last one. But I will point out, you're talking about the ambition of people naming in your being named in your family. Homer's is not without.
That's right. Homer's no slouch.
And you'll never guess what my sister's name is. Helen? Yeah, that's what it is.
Excellent.
John, I have a question. Referring to the mad Frenchman, isn't somebody fill me in? But in mining silver, didn't they use, I don't know, is it lead or something that was
or mercury? Yeah,
mercury is right. Mercury. Didn't they use that to extract the silver? And isn't that thought to be part of the toxicity?
Yeah, but he went on to do, other engineering feats after the Catalina episode. So I don't think he was actually mad. There was actually Americans' relationship with French people is complicated. We love it that France helped the founding of our republic, but the French are actually, it's what we inherited from the British, regarded as with some suspicion. And the story of Etienne was that he was a small man and he learned fencing in Paris. And when he came to California, often got into scrapes because actually the people accepted to mine were English speaking white people. They were okay as miners, but others weren't quite as welcome. So he was challenged to duels. This is what my father told me. My father liked a good story. But as the challenged party could name the weapon. So he'd say, okay, tomorrow at dawn with sabers. And the offended party would think, sabers? This guy might know something about sabers. I know nothing about sabers. So the challenge would be withdrawn. That's anyway the story. Maybe that's mad. I think it's kind of clever.
Yeah. So David Pepper's comment, the Mad Hatter and
oh yeah, absolutely.
Wonderland, hatters used mercury apparently.
That's right. No, he's on target there.
Blocking of hats. Yeah.
Oh, Homer. We before going to Wyoming, we went to the Tetons and Yellowstone, and the Tetons were named by a French fur trader.
Not surprising.
Yeah, and what do you think the word Teton means?
Oh, does it have to do with it? Is it an anatomical reference?
Yeah,
it's certainly French.
Yes, yes. Tetas or tits. My comment was, he must have really been out in the woods a long time.
Now, the ratio in the silver mines and in the west of the United States was like 90% men. And it's not widely known, but San Francisco in the 1880s and 90s had 650 houses of ill repute. About 350 were for the white guys, and 350 were for the Chinese workers. But there's quite a history of many of the homes. A friend of mine lived in one, so I knew a little more, having this red velvet with a waiting room. And it was quite, the people who made money in the West weren't the miners. It was everybody who took the money from the miners.
Yeah. Well, and Aiko said a word that now makes this video X-rated on my YouTube channel. Aiko, darn.
Sorry.
Things only are.
So, well, this has been a lot of fun, and I will hope that everyone in our group will have a chance to talk about their family roots and connections to history that Aiko and Shigeko and Homer has had today. So on we go with Cabrillo, unless there's any more comments. So his next stop was a quick one. It was San Pedro Bay, and it was full of smoke. And the question this was in October, and whether this was the seasonal Santa Ana winds and fires, or was it did the Native Americans, the Chumash plan their burns for that time of year? The natives there fled and did not welcome them, as opposed to Santa Catalina. And then they sent out an emissary, a large canoe, but they refused to come aboard. And then finally, Cabrillo played his trump card, which is to give them glass beads. And that assuaged them a little bit, but then they started talking about the bearded invaders in the East, and they'd heard this story, right, in San Diego, about Coronado's expedition and how he had laid waste and the atrocities at the Pueblos. And so they were I don't know, maybe the natives on Santa Catalina hadn't quite processed the news. But in any way, they played the same card that everybody would. Welcome to our village, but you know, there's much better villages up north. And so off Cabrillo went again, this time as unimpressed as he had been in San Diego. So it's on to Santa Monica, which it turns out was the Chumash heartland. And here's maybe some names you can actually read, but it's interesting that when the Spanish arrived, Native Americans were just recovering from climactic change, and we're interested in climactic change. But there was a medieval warming period that went on for almost 400 years. And in a way, it was helpful for what you could get from the sea, but it laid waste to the interior, and the land villages were just recovering. But the Chumash were fortunate to live on the interface with the ocean, which made them really one of the luckiest people on the planet in terms of access to food resources. Another place that was amazingly lucky was the Bay Area, but the Spaniards aren't going to know about that for another 230 years. The medieval climate anomaly is sometime known. It's been theorized that
we never came back up.
we can hear somebody talking. That maybe that was related to the fall of the Mayans. Maybe that is what actually laid the circumstances that will allow the Vikings to invade south. But in this area of the world, it was correlated with the expansion of the Tumal crafts, the sophisticated boats. More about that in a second. And the bow and the arrow. So there was more disruption, and there was a layering of societies, a hierarchy of elites based on money, shell bead currency. But as stated earlier, this warming period had just ravaged the inland. And there was no more trade with the inland. Mainly obsidian was one thing the inland had to trade with the sea. And the deer, which was a mainstay, their population suffered even more than the human population. Just a side note about our Bay Area paradise. There was a big dig at Pleasanton, and they found through looking at grave sites that and doing measurements that they survived just swell. The population didn't drop. One of the theory is that the acorns up here grew better. There was less sign of violence during this, so there was less social upheaval. And also the other theory is the delta, the fish from the delta. the shellfish in the bay that produced all those shell mounds, 400 shell mounds around the bay. So the Bay Area escaped this climate calamity, and they also escaped Spanish invasion for another 230 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that happened. In Santa Monica and further north, the Chumash were very friendly. They were invited into the villages, which were large. The houses being comparable to some places that they'd seen in Mexico, and it led to some speculation in their diaries that maybe this place would be worthy of conquest. The Chumash had these boats, and they were wrapped in fabric, which is interesting. And these boats could be manned by 12 people, and they could get further out to sea, and it allowed deep water fishing and sword fishing and huge catches, the Tomol plank boats. Now, here's a fun speculation. There's some evidence that there may have been a Polynesian connection. Go figure. But the name Tomol itself is similar, and the construction that was described as full sewn planks was spread all throughout Polynesia. Also, there's some DNA findings that suggest that there may have been Polynesian chickens in South Africa. So
South America.
South America, thank you. Thank you very much. So this argument is still raging. This is an interesting map. It's the green squares that you're interested in. The green squares are where there have been full sewn plank canoes. And of course, when you go to Hawaii, you see lots of big canoes like this, but that reaches all the way over to the Carolina islands and really all throughout Polynesia. Just a fun speculation, who knows? One of the negative side effects was the hierarchy that resulted. I call it Tomol wealth, that whoever owned the boats or controlled the boats also controlled the society. And this hadn't been true before. So now you see the development of some what we would today call inequality. And also on the positive side, specialization, which meant the theory of trade is you specialize in something and you trade it with the next village over. Well, with these boats, you could trade up and down the coast, different local products. But with stratification comes power and accumulation of wealth. And so even today, their Tongva descendants have constructed these tomols and take them out to sea. The Chumash pictographs, we all were very impressed by the pictographs at Wasco Cave. But here, they're not. These pictographs are not quite as old, but they're pretty impressive. Different colors all throughout the Chumash territory. My sister lives in Thousand Oaks, so maybe she'll go and take a look at the Chumash Museum. And then just a preview forward. Where are the Chumash today? And this is some of them in what survived of a mission. So now it's time for Cabrillo to head north. I'm checking my time. I think I've got about 5 minutes. I'll look for a stopping place with Cabrillo. So he heads north, and he goes all along the coast from Santa Monica. All these names that we're familiar with. Pueblo de las Canoas is apparently Malibu. Rudy has in-laws in Malibu. Jeremy has land in Malibu, such as it is. Unbuildable land, I'll hasten to add. And so going through his logs, there are many descriptions of what they encountered along here. I don't think anything worth our tearing to talk about. Santa Barbara, this community was a little more reticent, but they did take out sardines for the ship as a gift. And I think Santa Barbara for a while was called the Pueblo of Sardinas. They had discovered, as I said earlier, one of the most resource abundant places on the planet. So that's taken from one of my books. These people before civilization were not necessarily suffering. Big on seashells, which they used as currency, and maybe the derivation of the word Chumash itself. This is from Santa Barbara Museum. He did find one friendly place, but it was getting late in the year and winter was approaching, and Cabrillo resumed his search, quote unquote, for the Northwest Passage, which of course doesn't exist. And we've talked about why that myth persisted. At Point Concepcion, there were fierce northerly winds. He had to pause there for a while, but eventually he turns the corner until the winds die down, and he gets up to probably Point Reyes, which he called Cabo de Pinos. Then he proceeded on to the Russian River, but there, from somewhere around Point Reyes up to the Russian River, his ships were badly damaged. And this, just looking ahead and reading about Spanish ships over the next 200 years, you're going to hear they're always badly damaged when they get anywhere near Point Reyes. But fortunately, the ship was damaged, but they could float south with the current. I just flashed forward and did a little research on the famous shipwrecks of Point Reyes. but before we had cameras, there are any number of descriptions of ships that shipwrecked off of Point Reyes or around right around the Golden Gate. And God help the hapless mariner who drifts upon her shores. Drifting back down with the current, he missed the San Francisco Bay so twice, but everybody else would miss it for the next 220 years. And the answer, I'm going to start with that and lead with that next week. It's not just fog. It's not just Angel Island. It has to do with our river delta. It's not your usual river delta. It's called an inverted triangle, a rare kind of delta. And that's where we'll start next week with this. Why is this place where we live so unique? So I'll stop there and we'll return here next week.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions?
Well, a comment, again, it gets a little bit off topic, but you alluded to the natives of Southern California saying, oh, they're richer up north. And then, are you still there?
Yeah.
Then he mentioned a few slides later, the Vikings in 700. And when the Vikings got to Paris, Paris told them that Burgundy is really a much richer place than they are and easier to take. And the Vikings listened to them. They went up and then conquered, raped and pillaged in Burgundy. And there was bad feeling among Burgundians against the Parisians for quite a long time after that.
Yeah, and so the Vikings were able to get Normandy.
Yeah.
No, the land of the Norsemen, right?
That's right.
So yeah, there was a remarkable moment in French history where the Vikings are at the gates, and finally they come in, and there's a long negotiation, and what resulted was exactly what Homer said. Michael.
Breaking news. They've indicted Trump on the January 6th.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions or comments.
Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah. Well, one is just a heads up that which everybody might be interested in is our little Lafayette Community Garden is having an open house on the 13th. And one of the speakers there is going to be a fellow by the name of Doc Hale. And Doc Hale he's a paleontologist that's done a lot of work in the various little rivers around the Bay Miwok area, coming down through Lafayette, going into Walnut Creek. So that's very interesting. One of the things that he's come up with is how over the years, the size of the animals and the very large animals got essentially hunted out during the last thousands of years, or however many it's been, and they used to just use heavy spears in order to the natives could run around and follow the animals and ultimately kill them. As the years went on, then you see the big obsidian kind of arrows or spears change into arrows, and those are all there. Plus, he's got all kinds of little shells that they use for trade, for trading and that kind of thing. So that's a very he's been around for. I've seen him several times talk, and they're always very interesting. The other comment was when you talked about the Polynesians and maybe perhaps being in Santa Barbara. that's very, very possible. Right now, there's the Hukalea voyage. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it started in Hawaii. They actually then started in Alaska, and they're in I think about a 20-month, 2-year voyage around the Pacific with sailing canoes, and so that's been very interesting to follow. Which starting in about 400 AD is when they started coming north and ultimately into Hawaii, and it was in 1200, I think, when one of the priests from I want to say the Marquesa Islands, they came and realized that there were no kings in Hawaii, and so they went back and got a Kamehameha and brought Kamehameha to in 1200, and that of course then became the Ilii and the different kinds of there was the quote whether they were smaller people, and the question is, were they really Menehune, or is Menehune just a spirit? The other thing, another comment on Morgan territory and the Volvan and all of the various tribes that were on the side of Mount Diablo and how important that was. And there's all kinds of mortars that they used to be a very big gathering place, and the only thing that's left are the mortars that are in the stones. And that's where they used to grind the acorns, and they so that's been very interesting to see. And of course everything else is gone because it was all native or natural materials, and the only thing that's left is the stones. And one of the things in Santa Barbara there, I don't know if you noticed the dwellings that you had there, those were all looked like tule grass. And when you come to Lafayette Community Garden, you'll see that we've got a Bay Miwok dwelling there made out of tule, and so yeah, just very interesting kind of stuff that you're dealing with here, John. I appreciate that.
Sure. And last year Connie loosely gave us a couple of lectures on the Miwoks. And at the time, we thought, well, gee, maybe we should organize a field trip. But I think that would be a little bit overwhelming. Connie and a group of volunteers give lectures to third graders, fourth graders. And it seemed Aiko and I went to one that Connie gave, and it was just wonderful. But I think it would be overwhelming if we all went at once. But Bruce, I'm wondering if you and Harold, I think he's involved, and Barbara and our Carol could just keep us up to date on the schedule and when the groups of third or fourth graders are coming in, and sit in on it. It's wonderful. There's Connie's featured a musical part with percussion and dancing, and
they're in the process of making the shakers or the sticks for the kids to use. But the other one, that the open house would be very interesting to hear Doc Hale's talk, and that's the 13th of this month on Sunday.
Fantastic.
I can post what that time is.
Yeah, that would be great.
Super.
Another borderline relevant comment is tules. I don't like seeing the Eastern expression out in the boonies overtake our own California expression out in the tules. That's what we would say for a remote rural area.
That's true. That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you all. Um,
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, John.
Thanks, John.
You.